We are on our second week of our sermon series entitled Connected. And the whole point of our series so far has been there is no area of life where God should not be involved. That's the point. And so if you look at there's a little insert that you can pick up out in the entryway in the parlor. And if you look at that, they seem like they're relatively disconnected topics. But when you think about it, there's no area of life where God should not be connected to us and where God should not be involved. And so if you look at prayer, we've looked at last week. We're looking at it this week, too, in a slightly different way. Next week, Laverne Holdeman is talking about stewardship. Well, yeah, God's got to be involved in that area of our life, too. Obedience is coming up. Strength, hearing from God. All those areas, we've got to be connected with God. And I don't know if you ever get the calls. We don't have a landline. We haven't had one for really 10 years, I suppose. And we've had a cell phone that whole time, or 2 cell phones. And we get the call every so often from the company. I don't know if you get these. Hey, just want to check and make sure you've got the right plan and the right service, for your family. Can we add a line? All these kinds of things that they're trying to do, for our best interest. And there are certainly occasions where we need to upgrade. Most of the time, the plan's okay. I feel like we're paying too much, and so we're all okay on the same page. But sometimes you need a new phone. The old phone's just not doing it anymore. The connection quality's not good, whatever it is. And sometimes it's like that with our connection with God. We can ask the question, is it time for an upgrade? Because we often need that. In fact, probably everybody in this room, myself included, always is in need of an upgrade in our connection with God. And today we're talking about remaining, or abiding is a great word, in Christ, who is the true vine. And we look at that through John 15. Last week we kind of said our point was how you pray shapes your view of God. You can keep that in mind, but this week we're talking about the proximity we have to God in the prayer. And that proximity to God is drawn closer through a relationship with Jesus Christ. That's the long and short of the whole thing this morning. So we're talking about vines, remaining in Jesus who is the true vine. And we are city dwellers in this room by and large. Some of us grew up maybe on farms. Some of us were involved in farming in one way or another. But at this point, we're all sitting here and we're city dwellers, and we're pretty far removed from our food sources by and large. We didn't farm what we ate this morning, probably. But we get the basic idea of how plants grow. I don't think anybody's really under the impression that plants grow in a way that they don't. Right? This summer, I picked a small vine that was growing in front of our house, and I moved it. I transplanted it because I liked it, but I wanted it in a different place. We're all aware that if I were to take that plant and set it down without putting it in soil, just set it on the concrete, what's going to happen? It's going to die. So we know that when it comes to plants, you have to do something to care for them and give them the basics. But further than that, and what Jesus is going to bring up, and what we heard from Isaiah 5, was that you also can give it the proper conditions to thrive, not just to grow. The vine is growing. It's about 6 inches long. It was 6 inches when I started. It's much longer, and the roots were only like an inch at best. But now it's grown bigger and better. But under the right conditions, just like we'll see with a vineyard and vines, you can get a lot more to happen. And so I want to look again at Isaiah 5. There's a reason I chose that. Just verses 1 and 2. It'll be up on the screen. And if you're looking for a place to turn, by the way, stay with John 15. We'll look through a couple different passages there. But Isaiah 5, let's hear it again. It says, I will sing for the one I love, a song about his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on a fertile hillside. He dug it up and cleared it of stones and planted it with the choicest vines. He built a watchtower in it and cut out a winepress as well. Then he looked for a crop of good grapes, but it yielded only bad fruit. So if you look at that, you see the conditions were right for a vineyard to grow. Fertile hillside, that was a choice spot. People could make a vineyard grow on flat land, but for some reason they really preferred to terrace the hillside in this part of the world. And so, here you go. There was a fertile hillside. They made it look right. They cleared the land. And by the way, even though this Isaiah is 700 plus years before Jesus is saying, I'm the true vine, Not a lot, to my understanding, changed in vineyard or viticulture in those 700 years. Significantly changed this. You still need the fertile land. They have that. The land needs to be clear. The rocks are removed so that it's clear, good soil. It's a good vine, we find out. They picked the choicest stuff they could find to plant there. And so there you have a difference that's important to point out. You could find vines, grapevines out in the wild, and they're going to grow grapes. But if you cultivate those things, they're going to grow a lot more grapes, and they're going to grow better grapes. They're not just going to grow over a fence or up a tree or something like that. They're going to grow really good, choice grapes. If you cultivate them, make sure the grapes get the right amount of shade during the daytime, on a vine of some kind or a string. And then there's protection. We read about the watchtower. My loved one built a watchtower in the vineyard, so that if you read in other places, we even heard about it in Psalm 80 this morning, so that boars wouldn't come and eat it, so that foxes won't come and eat it, so that other people won't come and eat your food and your grapes and steal them. But then we get to the punchline, if you will, the last line. It says, I did all this stuff and I planted it and I made it perfect. And what did it yield? Bad fruit. And as we read this morning, the vine is Israel. Jesus is taking off from that same concept. They had this idea in mind at his time. And if you go to John 15:7, this is the verse I want to hang on to this morning. Jesus says, if you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done. This is an extended metaphor Jesus has used. It's not a parable like you often see him do. You are the vine, or I'm the vine, you are the branches. He's making a comparison. And what I see here to remain is two important relationships and then the issue of growth that we need to look at. And the first is this: we need to find the vine in the first place. We need to have a relationship with Jesus. That's very clearly what he's saying. He doesn't just say, I'm the vine, if you look at it, in John 15:1. He says, I'm the true vine. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to run into Israel as the false vine, because let's talk about this. Who's Jesus talking to? His audience is just 11 of his disciples by this point. Judas is already out of the picture. This is the Last Supper. So things are about to take off pretty quickly here after Jesus says these words. So he's only talking to 11 disciples. He's not talking to everybody who represents Israel. That's an important thing to note. In the Old Testament, we heard from Isaiah 5 this morning. We heard from Psalm 80. You can also read in Ezekiel, I have it written here, 15. You can read in Jeremiah 2, Israel, the vine. You can read about, in that post-Jesus day, but also before Jesus' time, that in the temple they had a giant vine. It was an important symbol. You can learn about the fact that during the time between the Testaments, there is the Maccabean revolts, the Jewish revolts as they rise up against their overlords to take back their part of the world. And when they print their money, as the Jewish ruling groups ruling the Jewish people in Israel, what do they put on the money? The vine. Why? Because the vine was Israel. So Jesus then comes along and says to his 11 disciples, I'm the true vine. That's quite a statement, given all that history, isn't it? So Israel's not the false vine. That's not what he's saying. He's again proclaiming that he's the fulfillment of what they've been waiting for. All of a sudden he's proclaiming your identity is not found in nationhood, it's found in me. I'm the vine. This is where you need to be connected. And that's a pretty big statement. And because of that, it changes how we see the vine and how we're connected to the vine and how they would have seen it too. Right? It's not by default where you're born or how you're born or anything like that into Israel. No, you've got to be connected with Jesus. You've got to choose that connection with Jesus. Corrie ten Boom is the one who's credited with saying God has no grandchildren. It's a really good statement, I think. He only has children. You're not born into the family. Right? Jesus is claiming to be the vine, and that's how you're connected now. John the Baptist made a very similar, or pointed in a similar direction. Back in Matthew 3, if you go back there, he said, don't think, talking to the Pharisees, and the Sadducees, just before Jesus is baptized. He says, don't think you can say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father. I tell you that out of these stones, God can raise up children of Abraham. So Jesus says, I'm the true vine. You get your connection by me. Not by being born into it, not by anything else. That's how you become part of the vine. So we have to find the vine, first of all, if we're going to really draw close to God in any way, as we talk about prayer. That's the first and most important step. And so I give this challenge this morning that if you haven't found the vine yet, this is a great day to do it. And I say that, I told you in a sermon probably almost a year ago. God spoke to me about a year ago. I just had a wonderful visit with somebody, got in the car, turned my attention to the sermon again, thinking I've got to put an ending on this sermon. And God clearly spoke and he said, don't assume that everyone you're preaching to already knows my son, like you always do. And I got to tell you, that's sat in the front of my mind for this whole year. And I don't assume that. I don't question your salvation, but I don't assume that everybody in this room has said yes to Jesus. You have to find the vine if you're going to have a deep connection with God. And so this morning I say this is a good day. No matter how long you've been here or if it's your first Sunday, if you're not connected with the vine, you must be. But then once you're connected with the vine, here's the tough thing. You've got to allow yourself to be cultivated, pruned. I don't know if you noticed that in the text this morning. Let's be clear. We're the branches. We're not the vine in Jesus' example. And if we're assuming, and we can do this, that Jesus is the head of the church, then we're just going to say that the branches are the church. So you've got to have that important connection with Jesus in the first place. But then by default, once you say, I'm connected with the vine, you've got a relationship with everybody else in this room and everybody else at the rooms across the city meeting right now that claim Jesus Christ. And we're not excluding people who have chosen Jesus in that and saying, oh, Israel historically is not part of it. No, if you're part of the vine, you're part of the vine. You've chosen Jesus. But it requires cultivation. Thank you for the word this morning, Dan. You brought that up. It requires something of us. And so I look at this and I think, and I'll ask this question, what's your attitude towards discipline? Because I'll confess to you, I am not the most disciplined person. I'm not as disciplined as I'd like to be. I'd love to be more disciplined in so many areas. I'm no perfect model. And here's the thing. We often prefer comfort to discomfort, don't we? Comfort to difficulty. And we hear a word like discipline and we say, well, that sounds kind of uncomfortable. That sounds difficult. And so I can look around the room and I can say there are people in this room who are very disciplined at certain things, myself included. We do have areas of discipline, almost all of us, right? Some of you are very disciplined at exercise. I discovered this morning that the first pair of pants I wore it revealed I was not disciplined in exercise. Some of you are very disciplined at that. Some of you are very disciplined at, where did I go? At eating, right? Eating the right things. Healthy eating. Some of you are very disciplined at a hobby, right? You will crochet, you'll do knitting, you'll do yard work, you'll read, not even for just for fun, but for continuing education, just for the excitement of it. Some of you are tremendous at money matters and budgeting, like it's a discipline. And for every one of those, we could add more to the list, and some of you will say, I'm not disciplined at that when I read that line. And others will say, man, that's my thing right there. But it brings up, what's my excuse for not being more disciplined in other areas of life? Particularly in this area where we're talking, in drawing closer to Jesus, in allowing Him to cultivate and prune me. What would be my excuse? Go to John 15:2. Jesus says, He, the vine dresser, the gardener, that's God, He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit He prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. Now when we read that, I don't know about you, but it's often striking that something entirely is getting cut off here. He cuts off the bad branches. Chops it off, the stuff that's not bearing any fruit. But did you notice something when you read this whole section earlier? Nobody's getting spared. in this. Everybody's getting some kind of cutting. It's just a matter of how much and for what purpose. So if you remain in me, Jesus says, I'm going to make you better than you are now. That's the result. But it's going to require difficulty. It might require discipline for sure, and it may even require some adversity. But I'm going to make you better on the other side because you allowed me to prune you and make you better. That's a big promise. I've told you in a previous sermon about a dog we had growing up. We didn't have it. The neighbors did. Buddy the dog. I liked Buddy. He was a collie, so Lassie type dog, right? Buddy, the day that Buddy got brushed, everybody, the word on the street was, don't touch Buddy, because he thinks you did it. And so he would snap at you on the day when he got brushed. Why? Probably because it hurt a little bit with all that long hair. But man, did he look good. He was better on the other side of that. Jesus says, I'm going to make you better if you let me prune you. And yet I look at that and I say, what's my excuse for not being then more disciplined and drawing closer and closer to Jesus if that's the result? John Ortberg, in his book, The Me I Want to Be, pinpoints it as well. He says, there is a God, it is not you. This is the beginning of wisdom. At first it looks like bad news because I would like to run the world. I would like to gratify my desires. I would like to have my own way. But once we think about it, this turns out to be very good news. You see, that's why we wouldn't necessarily pursue discipline in certain areas, because we want to run the show. We want the instant gratification or to gratify our desires. We want to have our own way. Discipline's not going to allow us to do that all the time. Pruning is going to hurt. Let's focus on the bad branches for a moment. Jesus says the bad branches get pruned. They get cut off entirely, in fact. Why is that? Non-producing vines, though they might look good, they're sucking the life out of the vines that are working. He says, I won't allow that. We need to be willing to be cultivated and pruned and ask those questions about what draws us away from drawing close to Jesus. Why would we buck at discipline, at getting close through prayer? Or getting close to study with other people? Or being at church? Or whatever it might be that's going to pull us closer? What in the world would it be that draws us away from Jesus? And why won't we get closer? And then we have to face the fact that there's a difference between saying, don't prune me, versus I can't be pruned. If we're telling God, don't prune me in those areas, I don't want to give that up. That reveals a lot. But we can't just ask what keeps us from God, but what would draw us closer to Jesus. And no matter where you fall in that answer, I suggest starting with prayer is the way to go. And asking for that pruning, though it might be difficult. The other thing is that it's not simply about being pruned, because we read in Isaiah 5, everything was done right. Pruning was done. Right? Isaiah 5:2. He looked for a crop of good grapes, it yielded only bad fruit. Everything was right, and sour grapes were the result. Good conditions, bad fruit. We need to produce something good. We actually do need to have noticeable growth if we're drawing close to Jesus. Those bad branches, let's go back to those one more time. What happens to the bad branches? They're cut, and then what? They're burned. And you know what? It's unlawful to use those bad branches to burn sacrifices at the temple. They weren't even good for that. They weren't good for anything except being thrown in the back field and burned, and that's it. You couldn't use them for a thing. I don't know about you, but if you think about this hard, this is a hard word. Because it's not simply about not being in Jesus. The bad branches are. They're connected to the true vine. They're just not producing anything. Folks, that's a hard word, especially if you think about the church. We're not just in by default and by being here. We're supposed to have noticeable growth in Jesus Christ. So sometimes it can get easy to fall into patterns. You know, I converted 5 years ago. here, or 10 years ago, or 20, or 30, or 50 years ago, and people get on fire right after they come to Jesus Christ, and they're really excited, and they're studying the Bible, and they're getting involved in groups, and they go on, but then 10 years later, 15 years later, whatever it is, where's the growth? I changed back then, I'm good. But we need to keep producing fruit. We need to have noticeable spiritual growth as we draw close to Jesus and continue drawing close. It's great to know how God worked then in my life and in yours. It's even better to know how God is working now. And to see that growth and that change and not be afraid of it. So the warning here is be pruned or be tossed into the fire. One way or another, there's trimming going on. Be useful or be useless. That's the warning. These aren't my words, by the way. And there's danger being in the middle ground with I'm happy with the way I am. I found Jesus and I'm cool. No, that's not what being in the vine is. That's not what he says. We need to continue to draw closer and closer to the true vine. Because that John 15:7 says, if you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. That second statement is pretty powerful, isn't it? Ask whatever you wish. And if we're not abiding or remaining in the vine, we can think, wonderful, the genie's out of the bottle. I can ask whatever I wish. That's not the case. Because the more we draw close to Jesus, the more our will is going to align with the will of the Father. And asking what we wish is really what God wishes. And there you'll see fruit. Prayer, most definitely, is about relationship, not requests. It's not bad to request, but that's not the point. We need to be connected with the true vine if we're going to draw close to God through Jesus Christ. We need to be ready when we draw close to Jesus to be pruned, be prunable, to have growth through that connection. We need to be willing to be branches with the rest of the branches that are here with us together and be prunable together. How you pray does shape your view of God. God isn't just a genie out of the bottle like we read in that. You read, if you remain in me, ask whatever you wish. It's not just that. But if we're willing to be pruned by the vine dresser himself, we'll become a better us, more in line with his will. And it might hurt and it will require difficulty and challenge. But we'll be better for it. And we will draw close to the true vine. Let's pray. God, draw us close to you and your Son, Jesus Christ. And this morning, if there are people in the room, Father, who need to draw near your Son, who never have, may your Spirit work. May your Son, Jesus, be revealed in this place in a new way. And God, when difficulty comes, help us see that you are the true vine dresser and you love us and you care about us. And that is why we would go through difficulty and hardship and the cultivation and growth and change to draw closer to you. God, be with us this morning, that we would find ourselves aligned with your will more and more each day. We pray this all in the name of your Son who loves us so much, the true vine. Amen.